It was the first week of December when 4 of us decided to spend a night at Daniel's family cabin. The cabin was about an hour outside the city, sitting deep in the woods where almost nobody went during the winter. Daniel's parents owned it for years, but it mostly stayed empty once the weather turned cold. For us, that made it the perfect spot. Quiet, no neighbors, and far away from the noise of everything else. It was me, Daniel, Josh, and Eric. We'd all been friends since high school, and we hadn't hung out properly in months. Everyone was busy with work or stuck in their own routines, so when Daniel suggested a quick getaway, the rest of us didn't hesitate. One night in the cabin, relax and catch up. The drive there was rough. Rain poured the entire way, hammering the windshield so hard the wipers barely kept up. The roads were slick and empty, with the occasional bent streetlight glowing weakly through the mist. As we got further out, the houses disappeared, and the forest pressed in on both sides of the road. Tall pines leaned over us, their shapes stretching into the darkness. We pulled up just after 9. The cabin looked like something out of an old postcard. 2 stories, dark wood siding, a wide front porch, and a single warm light glowing faintly in the living room window. Rain dripped off the roof in steady streams, and the sound of it filled the silence when we stepped out of the car. Inside, the cabin was warmer than expected. Daniel had set the timer on the fireplace earlier, so a low fire was already crackling in the stone hearth. The living room smelled faintly of wood smoke and dust, but it felt comfortable. There were 2 worn leather couches, a big rug in the middle, and shelves filled with old paperbacks and board games. We carried in our bags, shook off our jackets, and settled in. Josh opened a 6-pack. Eric tossed a bag of chips onto the table, and for the first hour, everything felt normal. The rain outside never slowed. It kept hitting the roof in heavy sheets, mixing with the occasional groan of the wind as it pushed against the trees. By 11 p.m., the storm was louder. The trees scraped against the siding, and the wind howled between the branches. We sat around the coffee table playing cards, laughing, and telling stories from the past. At one point, during a quiet moment, I thought I heard something different from the rain. A soft thump, heavy but muted, like weight landing on wood. My ears tuned in, but nobody else reacted. I told myself it was just the porch shifting in the wind. A few minutes later, though, it came again, louder this time, a dragging sound, something heavy sliding slowly across the porch. This time, all of us froze, cards still in our hands, eyes shifting toward the front door. No one spoke. The rain didn't cover it. The sound was deliberate, steady, and too close. Finally, Josh whispered, "Did you hear that?" And that was the moment none of us could pretend it was just the storm. For a few seconds, none of us moved. The dragging noise had stopped, but the 4 of us sat there listening, holding our breath without meaning to. The rain kept pounding against the roof. The fire hissed and cracked in the hearth, but everything else felt unnaturally still. Daniel leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the front door. "It's probably just a branch," he said quietly, but even he didn't sound convinced. Eric shook his head. "Branches don't sound like that." Josh set his cards down on the table and stood. "I'm telling you, that was on the porch, like right outside." I didn't want to agree, but my stomach was already tight. The porch wasn't big, just a few wooden steps and a platform that wrapped around one side of the cabin. Something, or someone, had been out there. Daniel sighed, trying to act calm. "I'll check." "Hold up," I said quickly, standing too. "Don't just swing the door open." We all looked at each other, waiting for someone else to say what we were all thinking. What if it wasn't just the wind? But no one wanted to admit it out loud. Finally, Daniel grabbed a flashlight from the shelf near the door. He clicked it on, the beam cutting a sharp white line across the living room wall. The rain outside muffled everything, but I could still hear the faint groan of the trees swaying in the wind. Daniel moved slowly to the door. His hand hovered over the lock for a moment before he undid it. We all stood behind him, tense, watching. He cracked the door open just enough to shine the light out onto the porch. The rain blew in, cold and wet against my face. The beam of the flashlight shook slightly as Daniel scanned it across the porch boards. For a moment, nothing. Just the wet wood, the railing slick with water, the steps leading down into the dark yard. Then the beam caught something. a wet streak across the porch boards. A long, dark line like something heavy had been dragged across the wood and toward the steps. The rain hadn't had time to wash it away completely. It gleamed faintly in the light, fresh and uneven. Josh swore under his breath. What the hell? Could be an animal, Daniel said quickly, pulling the light back. Deer or something. On the porch? Eric asked. A deer doesn't climb stairs. No one said anything after that. Daniel shut the door and locked it again, harder this time. The sound of the bolt sliding in place was louder than it should have been. We went back to the couches, but the mood had shifted. None of us picked up the cards again. We just sat there, listening to the storm, each of us waiting for the noise to return. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Just rain, wind, the occasional scrape of a branch. Slowly, conversation started again. Quiet at first, then a little louder as we tried to shake it off. Daniel even laughed, forcing the tension down. We're just being paranoid. Cabin in the woods, stormy night. It's messing with our heads. I nodded, pretending to agree. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about that streak on the wood. It hadn't looked like an animal. It had looked like something being dragged, something heavy. We were still sitting there when it happened again. This time, it wasn't a drag. It was a knock. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks on the porch railing. Knock, knock, knock. Not the door, not the wall. The railing, just outside the window to our left. Every single one of us froze. Daniel's flashlight was still on the table. His hand reached for it slowly, like moving too fast might trigger whatever was outside. The knocks didn't come again. Instead, the sound of footsteps moved across the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Each board creaked in order, one after the other, heading straight toward the door. None of us breathed. None of us moved. The footsteps stopped, right outside. And then came the sound of something brushing against the door. A faint scrape, soft but unmistakable, like fingers trailing slowly across the wood. The sound against the door was so faint at first, I thought I imagined it. A thin, dragging whisper of contact, like nails sliding lightly over wood. But then it came again, slower, longer. Something was deliberately tracing the door from top to bottom. Josh whispered, "That's not the wind." His voice cracked halfway through. No one moved. The fire popped once in the hearth, and all of us flinched like it was a gunshot. The storm outside still roared, but underneath it, the scraping was unmistakable. Daniel finally grabbed the flashlight from the table, his knuckles white around it. He mouthed something. Maybe, what do we do? But none of us had an answer. The scraping stopped. For a few long seconds, the only sound was the rain. I felt a thin bead of sweat roll down my temple even though the cabin was cool. Every nerve in my body was alive, waiting. Then came the sound of weight shifting on the porch, wood groaning under pressure. Someone, or something, was still out there, standing right in front of the door. Eric broke the silence. "We need to call someone, cops, ranger, anybody." I pulled my phone from my pocket, 1 bar of signal, flickering in and out. Josh was already checking his, shaking his head. "Nothing, I can't get anything out here." "Cabin's got a landline," Daniel said, but when he picked it up and pressed the receiver to his ear, the line was dead. He slammed it back into place, muttering, "Storm must have knocked it out." The scraping came again, this time higher up, near the window above the door. The sound was sharper, like something harder than a fingernail. Metal, maybe, slowly dragging across the glass. Eric whispered, "It's testing us." Nobody argued. Daniel shined the flashlight at the window, but the glare only showed our own reflections, 4 pale, tense faces staring back at us. Whatever was outside stayed hidden in the dark. Josh stood suddenly too fast. "Screw this. I'm not just sitting here waiting for some freak to break in." He grabbed a fireplace poker from the stand, his jaw set tight but his hands shaking. "Don't open the door," I said quickly. "Don't even think about it." "I'm not opening it," Josh shot back. "I just don't want to be empty-handed if that thing comes through." The room fell silent again. We all listened. No scraping now, no footsteps, just rain. For a moment, I almost believed it was gone. Maybe the storm had spooked some drifter or animal and they'd moved on. I let out a shaky breath, and that's when we heard it. From the side of the cabin, not the porch this time, a heavy thump against the wall, as if something huge had leaned its full weight into the siding. The wood shuddered with the impact. The shelves rattling. Another thump, higher this time, closer to the second floor. We all turned our heads, staring at the ceiling. The sound came again, directly above us. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing across the second floor. But none of us had gone upstairs. The only thing up there were the empty bedrooms. Josh whispered what all of us were already thinking. How the hell did it get inside? The four of us stood frozen in the living room, staring at the ceiling. The sound was unmistakable. Slow, steady footsteps moving across the upstairs floorboards. Each creak felt heavier than the last. Eric whispered, "We locked the back, right?" Daniel nodded quickly. "Yeah, when we came in. Windows too." Josh's grip tightened around the fireplace poker. "Then how the hell is someone up there?" None of us had an answer. The sound above us shifted again, pacing, turning, then stopping completely. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I could hear my own heartbeat. My mouth was dry. Every instinct told me not to go upstairs, but the longer we waited, the harder it became to ignore. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We can't just sit down here while someone's walking around up there." "Or something," Eric muttered. Daniel ignored him. He grabbed a second flashlight from the drawer under the bookshelves and handed it to me. His voice was low, controlled, but strained. "We go up together, slow, stay close." I didn't want to, but I nodded anyway. Josh raised the poker like a weapon, and Eric found a heavy lamp base, unscrewing the cord and holding it like a club. The staircase creaked under our weight as we climbed. Each step felt louder than it should have, like we were warning whoever, or whatever, was up there that we were coming. The flashlight beams wavered, catching the worn wallpaper, the framed photos of Daniel's family, the empty hallway at the top. When we reached the landing, the air felt different, colder somehow and heavy. The hallway stretched left and right, with 3 bedroom doors and a bathroom at the end. All of them were closed. Josh whispered, "Which one?" We listened. For a long time, nothing. Then, from the far left door, came a faint sound, a shuffle, like fabric brushing against wood. Daniel swallowed hard. "That's the guest room." We moved together, inch by inch down the hall. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam jittering across the door frames. The house was old, every floorboard beneath us groaning, but the sound inside that room didn't belong to us. Daniel reached the door first. He glanced back at us, raised his hand to count down silently. 3, 2, 1. He threw the door open and shined the light inside. The room was empty. Nothing but a bed, a dresser, and a chair in the corner. Dusty, untouched. "Check the closet," Josh whispered, pushing forward with the poker raised. Daniel crossed the room and yanked the closet door open. Again, nothing. Just hangers, a few old jackets. We all exhaled at once, the tension breaking just slightly. Maybe it was the storm, or the house settling, or our nerves playing tricks. Then the bathroom door at the end of the hall slammed shut. The sound was so sudden, so violent, it echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. We all jumped, the flashlight beams jerking wildly. "No way," Eric hissed. "There's no draft strong enough to do that." Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Stay behind me." We edged toward the bathroom, each step heavier than the last. My mouth felt like sand. Josh muttered something under his breath, maybe a prayer, but his voice was shaking. When we reached the bathroom door, Daniel's hand hovered over the knob. The wood was damp and cold under the flashlight beam, as if the storm outside had seeped through the walls. "On 3, Daniel whispered. He counted. 1, 2. And before he reached 3, something inside the bathroom scraped against the floor. A sharp, dragging noise, like metal on tile. The 4 of us froze outside the bathroom door, the sound still echoing in our heads. Metal scraping against tile, deliberate and slow. Daniel's hand hovered over the doorknob. His breathing was fast and shallow, but his voice came out steady. "We open it now, all together." Josh gripped the fireplace poker tighter, his knuckles white. Eric lifted the lamp base like he was ready to swing the second anything moved. I tried to steady the flashlight beam, but my hand wouldn't stop shaking. Daniel counted under his breath. 1, 2. On 3, he twisted the knob and shoved the door open. The beam of our flashlights swept across the small bathroom. White tile floor, old clawfoot tub, mirror over the sink. Everything looked exactly the way it should have, except for the puddle on the floor. A wide, irregular pool of water stretched from the tub to the center of the room. It looked fresh, glistening under the light, though no faucet was running. And in the middle of that puddle, a kitchen knife. Its blade was long and thin, gleaming wet as if it had just been washed. No one spoke. We just stared at it, every muscle in our bodies tensed, waiting for something to happen. Josh finally broke the silence. Where the hell did that come from? Who brings a knife up here? Daniel swallowed hard. It's from downstairs. I saw one just like it in the block by the sink. Are you saying someone carried it up here? Eric asked, his voice sharp. I'm saying, Daniel said slowly, that it wasn't us. I stepped into the doorway, shining the flashlight around the bathroom. The walls were damp, beads of condensation rolling down like sweat. The mirror over the sink was fogged, though none of us had used the bathroom since we arrived. And then I saw it. On the mirror, faint but visible where the condensation had gathered, a smear, a line drawn with a finger, shaky and uneven. It wasn't a word, not a picture, just a single, long, vertical stroke, running from the top of the glass to the bottom, like someone had stood in front of the mirror, knife in hand, and dragged their finger straight down the fogged surface. Josh cursed under his breath, stepping back into the hall. Nope, I'm not staying up here. I don't care what anyone says. Daniel bent down, hesitating before picking up the knife with the edge of his sleeve. He held it in the beam of the flashlight. The blade was clean, too clean. No rust, no stains, like it had been scrubbed just moments ago. The sound of the storm outside suddenly felt louder, like it was pressing in on the walls. The windows rattled. The whole house groaned in the wind. Eric's voice dropped to a whisper. If somebody's screwing with us, they're not normal. We backed out of the bathroom slowly, Daniel carrying the knife like evidence. None of us dared close the door behind us, like turning our backs on it would be a mistake. We reached the top of the stairs and stopped, unsure what to do next. The silence above us was crushing. Then, from the living room below, we heard it. The scrape of a chair sliding across the floor. Deliberate, slow, like someone had just pulled out a seat at the table. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor drifted up from the living room like a signal meant just for us. The four of us stood frozen at the top of the stairs, listening. None of us breathed. Josh finally whispered, "There's somebody down there." Daniel's jaw tightened. He still held the knife wrapped in his sleeve, his flashlight cutting a shaky beam down the steps. We locked the door. You all saw me lock it. Then how the hell... Eric began, but his voice trailed off. None of us had an answer. The silence that followed was worse. We waited, straining to hear something else. For a long moment, nothing came. No footsteps, no movement. Just the constant storm pounding against the roof. Daniel finally said, "We go together." Slow. Every step down the staircase groaned under our weight, each one sounding louder than the last. The flashlight beam jerked across the walls, catching family photos, framed paintings, and then the living room below. The table was the first thing I noticed. One of the wooden chairs had been pulled back, not knocked over, not shifted by accident, pulled out neatly, like someone had just sat down. Josh's grip tightened on the poker. "I told you, someone's in here." We moved into the room, flashlights sweeping every corner. The fireplace still burned low, the shadows stretching long and strange across the walls. The rest of the cabin looked exactly the same as we'd left it. Bags by the door, empty bottles on the coffee table, cards scattered from our unfinished game. But the air felt different, heavy, charged. Daniel whispered, "Check the kitchen." Eric and I moved toward the doorway, my flashlight trembling as I swung it across the counters and cabinets. The knife block sat near the sink. Empty slot. The exact size and shape of the knife Daniel was still holding. The storm rattled the windows again, and I flinched. Eric shook his head. "Nobody's here. I don't see anyone." Josh snapped from the living room. "Don't say that. Don't..." He cut off suddenly. When I turned back, his face was pale, his eyes locked on something past me. I swung the flashlight back toward the kitchen. The door to the basement was wide open. None of us had opened it. The stairs leading down disappeared into pure blackness, a damp smell drifting up from below. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the dark. A flicker, the faintest suggestion of motion. "Shut it," Eric whispered. "For God's sake, shut it now." Daniel shook his head. "If someone's in here, they're down there." "Then let them stay down there," Josh snapped. His voice was trembling, high with panic. "We leave." We grab our stuff, we get in the car, and we drive. The idea made sense. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, but Daniel hesitated, his hand tightening on the knife. What if they follow us? What if they're waiting for us to make a move? The wind howled against the cabin, rattling the roof. The basement door creaked slightly on its hinges, swaying as though breathing with the storm. We stood there, caught between choices, run or investigate. The storm outside had become relentless, pounding against the windows and rattling the cabin like it wanted in. Thunder rolled somewhere deep in the mountains, shaking the walls. We all stood in the living room, staring at that open basement door as though it were a living thing. Josh's knuckles had gone white around the fireplace poker. "I'm serious. We leave. Right now. Grab the bags, forget everything else, and just go." "No," Daniel muttered, his eyes fixed on the black rectangle of the stairwell. "If someone's hiding down there, we can't just walk out. What if they follow us? What if they've been waiting for that?" Eric's voice cracked with tension. "We're 4 grown men with weapons. We don't run from shadows." I wanted to believe him, but the truth was, the shadows felt bigger than us, heavier, like they had teeth. For a moment, nobody spoke. The fire hissed softly in the hearth. Wind howled. Then Daniel took a slow step toward the basement door. "Daniel," I said sharply. "Don't." He didn't stop. "I need to know. If we run without knowing what's in there, I'll never close my eyes again." Josh swore under his breath. "Then go be a hero by yourself." But none of us let him go alone. Eric grabbed the flashlight tighter. I raised mine too, my hands trembling. Josh followed behind, muttering curses under his breath, his poker scraping against the floor every time he adjusted his grip. Together we moved closer to the basement door. The air grew colder with every step. By the time we reached the threshold, the warmth of the fire was gone, replaced by a damp chill that clung to our skin. Daniel raised the knife. He leaned forward slightly, his light cutting a weak beam into the stairwell. The steps descended into blackness, vanishing before the beam could touch bottom. The smell was worse now, wet wood, mold, and something faintly metallic. Josh swallowed hard. "Tell me you smell that." "Yeah," I whispered. "Blood," Eric said flatly. The word landed like a hammer. We stood there, waiting for something. Movement, a sound, anything. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, Daniel set his foot on the first step. The wood groaned. My pulse kicked so hard I felt dizzy. He took another step, then another. The knife gleamed faintly in the beam of his flashlight. "Stay behind me," he said. I followed, my breath ragged in my throat. Eric came next, his beam of light shaking wildly against the wall. Josh hesitated at the top, muttering, "This is insane," before finally stepping down after us. The basement swallowed us whole. The deeper we went, the less sound there was. No storm, no rain, no fire, just our breathing and the creak of the stairs. At the bottom, the light hit the concrete floor. Dust floated in the air. Old boxes lined the walls, stacked unevenly. Tools hung on rusted hooks. A workbench stretched across the far side, empty. Or at least it looked empty. We spread out slowly, flashlights cutting across shelves and piles of junk. Every shadow looked alive. Daniel's voice came low. "Check everything." I moved toward the boxes, brushing past a broken lamp and what looked like an old trunk. Eric checked the shelves, his light bouncing over jars of nails, old paint cans, coils of wire. Josh stayed near the stairs, refusing to go farther than a few steps into the room. That's when Daniel froze. "Wait," he whispered. We all turned. His flashlight was locked on the workbench. Something long and thin lay across the wood. A rope, fresh rope. Beside it, a pair of metal handcuffs. and next to those, something worse. A rusty hacksaw, the blade darkened with a crusted stain that needed no explanation. Eric cursed under his breath. Josh shook his head violently. Nope, we're not doing this. We're leaving, right now. I couldn't take my eyes off the workbench. The tools weren't covered in dust like everything else. They had been touched, used, recently. That's when the sound came, not from the basement, from upstairs. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. One after another, pacing across the living room floor directly above us. Josh's face drained of color. Who the hell is in the house? We all froze, staring up at the ceiling. The footsteps stopped. The silence pressed down on us like a weight. Then, the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping across the wooden floor again, right above our heads. Daniel raised the knife higher, but his hand was shaking now. "They're not in the basement," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, thin. "They're upstairs." The silence after the footsteps was worse than the sound itself. The four of us stood, frozen in the basement, flashlights trembling, every nerve in our bodies screaming at us to move, but none of us could. Josh was the first to whisper, his voice a frantic hiss. "We're trapped, and whoever's up there knows it." "Shut up," Daniel snapped back, though his own voice quivered. "We don't know that." The scrape of the chair upstairs echoed again, slow, deliberate, right above us. Eric muttered, "No one else should be here. No one. That's not possible." I felt the cold sinking deeper into my bones, not just from the damp air of the basement, but from the crushing awareness that we had made the worst choice possible, walking down into this trap. I whispered, "We can't stay here. If they come down, there's only one way out." Daniel nodded slowly, eyes locked on the stairwell. We moved together. We go back up. Josh shook his head violently, his poker clattering against the wall as he backed away. "Are you insane? You heard it. Someone's standing right there waiting for us." "Then what's your plan?" Daniel hissed. "Sit down here until the storm stops? You saw that table? You saw the rope? The handcuffs?" "Don't say it!" Josh snapped, his voice cracking. We all fell silent again. The storm outside raged, but inside the cabin, every sound was magnified. We heard the faint creak of wood as the weight above shifted. Slow, measured steps, crossing the living room. My stomach twisted. Whoever was up there wasn't moving randomly. They were pacing, listening, waiting. Daniel motioned toward the stairs. "We go, now." None of us wanted to, but the alternative was worse. We gathered at the base of the stairs, our flashlights shaking, as we aimed them upward into the darkness. Daniel took the lead, knife gripped so tight his knuckles had gone pale. He placed his foot on the first step. The wood groaned. We froze, listening. The footsteps upstairs stopped. A terrible silence pressed down, the kind of silence that makes you want to scream just to break it. Daniel took another step, then another. Slowly, carefully, he climbed, the rest of us following close behind. Halfway up, Josh let out a shaky breath, his whisper almost a plea. "This is suicide." "Quiet," Daniel hissed. At the top, Daniel paused, knife raised. His flashlight beam wavered across the kitchen doorway, across the living room beyond. Nothing moved. We stepped into the kitchen one by one. The smell of damp earth still clung to us from the basement. The warmth of the fire was almost shocking after the cold below, but the air wasn't comforting. It felt thick, wrong, like we were intruding in our own space. The living room looked just as we'd left it. The fireplace glowed low, shadows crawling along the walls. The table, with its single pulled-out chair, sat silently. Empty. No one stood there. No one waited. But the footprints on the floorboards said otherwise. Daniel's light caught them first. Muddy prints smeared across the wood, fresh, glistening wet from the storm. They led from the front door, straight to the chair, and then they stopped. No prints leading away. Eric swore softly under his breath. "That doesn't make sense. That doesn't..." The sound cut him off. A knock, 3 hard raps, rattling the front door like a fist pounding from the outside. We all spun, flashlights jerking toward the entrance. Josh's face twisted. "What the hell?" The knocks came again, louder this time, then silence. Daniel edged closer, knife raised, his voice barely audible. "Who's there?" No answer, just the wind screaming outside. And then, another sound, not at the front door, from the back of the cabin, a soft tapping against the window glass. We turned, our lights landing on the far window near the kitchen. Rain streaked down the glass, the storm battering against it. But beneath the water, a shape pressed close, a hand, pale, splayed wide against the pane. Josh stumbled backward, his voice cracking. "Oh my God!" The hand slid slowly down the glass, leaving a smear, before vanishing into the darkness outside. For a second, I thought it was gone. Then the front door rattled violently, as if someone had slammed their entire weight against it. The entire frame shook. Eric shouted, "They're trying to get in!" Daniel rushed forward, jamming his shoulder against the door. "Help me!" We all threw ourselves against it, the wood shuddering under the impact of whatever was outside. The storm roared louder, rain hammering against the roof, wind screaming through the cracks. And then, it stopped. The storm still raged, but outside the knocking, the pounding, everything was gone. We stood there, pressed against the door, chests heaving, flashlights trembling. Josh's whisper broke the silence. It wasn't just one person. And that's when the sound came again, not from outside, from upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps, crossing the floor above our heads. We stood in the living room, our backs pressed against the front door, listening. The footsteps upstairs didn't hurry, didn't stumble. They moved slowly, deliberately, like someone pacing, like they wanted us to hear every step. Eric's flashlight beam flickered across the ceiling, as if the thin plaster could reveal the thing walking above us. His voice shook. "We're not alone. There's somebody up there." Josh shook his head, clutching the fireplace poker so tight the metal dug into his palm. No, this doesn't make sense. The prints, they stopped at the chair. You all saw it. They didn't go upstairs. How the hell did they get up there? The footsteps shifted again, now moving toward the far end of the second floor. Boards creaked with each step, long dragging movements, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. Daniel's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might snap. "We need to see. Whatever's up there, we can't just sit here while it walks above us." Josh rounded on him, his voice breaking. "Are you insane? You saw the basement. You saw the table, the chains. This place isn't normal. We should have left the second that door rattled." "We're still here," Daniel shot back. "That thing is in the house with us. If we leave it behind, it'll follow us into the woods. Do you really want to be running in the storm, not knowing what's at our back?" No one answered, because he was right. The storm outside howled louder, the windows rattling in their frames. For a moment, it felt like the cabin itself was breathing with us, holding its breath, waiting for our choice. Finally, Daniel said it. "We go upstairs, together, no splitting up." Josh didn't move at first, his eyes fixed on the staircase, like it was a death sentence. I could hear him whispering to himself over and over, "Don't go up, don't go up, don't go up." But when Daniel started toward the stairs, the rest of us followed. We had no choice. The staircase groaned under our weight, every step louder than it should have been. My flashlight beam trembled, the shadows stretching and jerking across the walls like they were alive. Halfway up, the footsteps above us stopped. Dead silence. We froze, our breaths sharp in the air. The second floor was just ahead, the narrow hallway lined with doors, the guest rooms, the bathroom at the far end. The darkness above looked thicker somehow, as if the light didn't want to reach it. Daniel raised the knife. His voice was low, steady, but I could hear the fear straining under it. "Stay close." We climbed the final steps. The second floor hallway stretched before us. 4 doors, 2 on each side, all closed. The air was different here, stale, heavy, carrying the faintest smell of damp wood and something else. Something faintly metallic. Blood. Josh gagged softly. "Oh God." Eric swung his flashlight to the first door on the left. "We check them one by one. We have to." Daniel reached for the doorknob. His hand hovered there, trembling. Then he twisted it and shoved the door open. Empty. Just a guest room. Bed neatly made, Window rattling from the storm outside. Nothing else. We all exhaled, but too soon. A thud shook the ceiling above us. All of our heads snapped upward. There were footsteps again. Not in the hallway, not in the rooms, in the attic. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. There's someone above us. Josh shook his head furiously. Number, no way. That's impossible. Nobody went up there. The attic entrance was in the ceiling at the far end of the hallway. A square panel with a pull string. None of us had touched it since arriving. Now, with the storm howling and the house creaking around us, it seemed to pulse in the shadows. Eric's voice cracked. We're not opening that. I'm not... A sound cut him off. From behind the second door on the right. A breath. Long. Slow. Like someone exhaling just inches from the other side. We froze. I could see the doorknob tremble, gently, like fingers on the other side were toying with it. Josh staggered backward, nearly dropping the poker. Number, no, 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 no. Daniel raised the knife, his voice barely audible. Whoever's in there, they know we're here. The doorknob twisted. Click. It stopped. Silence. And then, all at once, the attic string dropped from the ceiling on its own, dangling in front of us like a noose. The hallway felt too small for the four of us. My flashlight beam shook against the walls, the wallpaper peeling like rotting skin. The attic string swung slightly back and forth, though there was no draft. Above it, the square panel of the attic door sat flush in the ceiling, as if waiting for one of us to pull it. But it was the door to our right that held us captive. The sound of breathing continued, long and deliberate, inches away from us on the other side. Whoever was there didn't try to hide. They wanted us to know they were waiting. Josh whispered, "We can't open it. Don't you see? That's exactly what it wants." Eric's jaw tightened, sweat glistening across his forehead. So what? Leave it shut and wait for it to come out on its own. Number, we finish this. I wanted to scream at both of them, to tell them to shut up before the thing behind the door decided to show itself. But Daniel was already moving. He raised the knife in one hand and reached for the knob with the other. "Daniel, stop!" I hissed. He didn't. He twisted the knob and shoved the door wide open. The room beyond was swallowed in shadow. My flashlight beam cut across it. Dusty floorboards, a single bed pushed against the wall, an old dresser with the mirror cracked down the center. The curtains fluttered slightly, though the window was shut tight. Empty. No one there. But the sound of breathing didn't stop. It grew louder, deeper, except now it wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from all around us. I spun in a panic, my light jerking across the walls of the hallway. Eric's flashlight beam quivered. Josh backed toward the stairs, his poker raised uselessly in shaking hands. "Where is it?" I whispered. Then the mirror caught my eye. On the cracked surface of the dresser mirror, 4 reflections stared back at me. Daniel, Eric, Josh, and myself. But as the beam shifted, a 5th reflection flickered into view. It was standing between us, tall, wrongly shaped, its head tilted too far to the side, like its neck had been broken. And though the figure wasn't in the room, its reflection leaned closer, close enough that its mouth nearly brushed my ear in the glass. I swear I felt the breath, hot, wet, right against my skin. I staggered back, slamming into Daniel. "It's in the mirror." Before I could finish, the reflection's hand twitched. Long, pale fingers stretched upward and pressed flat against the inside of the glass. The mirror groaned. A crack spread across it, jagged and sharp. Josh screamed, his voice high and raw. "We're leaving! Now!" Before any of us could react, he bolted. His footsteps thundered on the creaking floorboards as he shoved past us, nearly knocking Eric off balance. His flashlight beam swung wildly before disappearing down the staircase. "Josh, wait!" I shouted, but he didn't listen. We heard his shoes pounding against the stairs, each impact sharp and hurried. And then, halfway down, the sound stopped. No scream, no fall, just silence. Daniel froze, knife clutched tight, his chest heaving. Eric's flashlight beam shook violently across the stairwell. "He's gone," Eric whispered, his voice cracking. He's gone." My stomach turned cold. In that moment, I thought the house had swallowed him whole, just like it wanted to. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. And then, somewhere below, I caught sight of something. Josh's legs sprawled across a step. "He's there!" I gasped, shoving past Daniel. We rushed down the staircase, flashlights darting across the walls, terrified of what we might find. Josh lay crumpled halfway down, his body twisted awkwardly against the railing. His poker had slipped from his hand, clattering against the steps. His eyes were closed. For a second, I thought he was dead. I dropped to my knees beside him, shaking his shoulder. Josh, wake up." No response. Eric leaned close, his trembling fingers pressed against Josh's neck. A moment later, he exhaled with shaky relief. Pulse. He's breathing. He just fainted. Daniel crouched beside us, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temples. He glanced back up the stairs. The mirror's faint groan still echoed from the hallway above. "We're not staying another second," he said hoarsely. "Help me carry him." We didn't argue. None of us wanted to go back up there. Eric and Daniel hoisted Josh by his arms, while I grabbed his legs. Together we stumbled down the rest of the staircase, nearly tripping in our desperation. The storm's howl grew louder the closer we got to the front door. Bags were still scattered by the entrance, but we ignored them. The only thing that mattered now was getting out. Daniel twisted the lock with frantic hands, yanking the door open. The storm slammed into us immediately, sheets of rain driven sideways by the wind, cold and heavy, soaking us within seconds. The trees bent under the gusts, branches cracking in the darkness beyond the porch. We staggered outside, carrying Josh's limp body between us. My flashlight beam flickered across the driveway, the muddy ground shining under the downpour. Behind us, the cabin loomed, its windows glowing faintly from the firelight within. For a moment, I swore I felt something watching from inside, but I didn't look back again. None of us did. We were out, and none of us wanted to step foot in that house ever again. The rain was relentless. It hammered down so hard it felt like needles driving into my skin. Within seconds, all of us were drenched, hair plastered to our faces, clothes heavy with water. Josh's weight dragged on us, his body limp, as Daniel and Eric carried him under the arms. I supported his legs, slipping every few steps as the muddy ground sucked at my shoes. "Where's the car?" Eric shouted over the storm. His voice was raw, nearly drowned out by the howl of the wind. "Driveway, straight ahead," I yelled back, though the sheets of rain blurred everything. My flashlight beam flickered uselessly against the downpour, barely piercing more than a few feet in front of us. Daniel gritted his teeth, his jaw clenched as he shouldered Josh's weight. "Just keep moving." We stumbled across the yard, branches whipping against our arms, water pooling in uneven patches of earth. The storm had transformed the ground into a swamp, slick mud pulling at every step, roots and rocks hidden beneath puddles. More than once, Josh's body nearly slipped from our grip, and each time, Daniel barked, "Hold on, don't drop him." The car finally came into view at the edge of the driveway, dark and slick with rain. Relief surged through me until I remembered. The keys. They were inside, in the bag by the door. I froze for half a second, my stomach lurching. I hadn't grabbed mine. Daniel hadn't either. Josh, unconscious, was the one who had been driving. His keys were in his jacket pocket, the one soaked and heavy on his body right now. "Check him!" Daniel shouted as if he'd read my mind. Eric pinned Josh against his chest while I fumbled through his jacket pockets. My hands were numb, trembling from the cold and adrenaline, but finally, my fingers closed around metal. I yanked the keys free, rainwater dripping from them, and held them up. "I got them!" Daniel kicked the car door open. The interior light blinked faintly against the storm, a small island of safety. We heaved Josh into the back seat, his head lolling against the window. Eric climbed in beside him, checking his pulse again, muttering, "Still breathing, still breathing." Daniel slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking as he jammed the key into the ignition. I scrambled in next to him, slamming the door shut against the roar of the wind. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was silence. The storm still raged outside, but inside the car it was muffled, distant. My heartbeat pounded louder than the rain. Daniel turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught. The dashboard lights flickered to life, the wipers dragging across the soaked windshield in wide, clumsy arcs. None of us spoke. None of us dared. We just sat there for a moment, breathing hard, dripping water onto the seats. watching the storm thrash against the glass. Finally, Daniel gripped the wheel tight enough that his knuckles whitened. He looked at me once, then at Eric in the rear seat, with Josh slumped against him. "Tell me we're not going back," he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't answer. None of us did, because we all knew the truth. Whatever was still inside that cabin, it wasn't worth ever finding out. Daniel put the car in gear, the tires spinning briefly in the mud before catching. The headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating the narrow track that wound back into the trees. And without another word, we drove.